The Republic of Honduras is a country in Central America that since the 1990s and until today has been dominated by political unrest. I will be focusing on the asylum seekers that are leaving this country and moving into the United States and settling specifically into California. Honduras has a population of about 9 million people. Most of the people living in Honduras go to school up until they are 10 years old. Each citizen is estimated to make about 5,000 US dollars per year. Due to such low gross domestic production per person in the country, 66% of the Honduran population is living in poverty, and it is estimated that 1 out of 5 are in extreme poverty. Since 2014, the poverty rate has steadily increased by about 2 to 3% each year. As I mentioned previously, in Honduras, there is constant political and economic unrest due to gangs and drug trafficking organizations. This is then further strengthened by poverty and corruption from the government. This is why so many people in recent years have been trying to flee and seek asylum in countries like the United States. Most of the population in Honduras are between 24 and 40 years old. Most of the young demographic of the country are involved in the violent gangs, which lead even more people to want to take their families out of the country and flee. The country of settlement is the United States, which has a huge population of over 325 million people. 87.7% of the people in the United States who are 25 and older have at least a high school diploma. The median household income is $60,000 after the government has collected taxes. The region of particular settlement, which is California, has a population of about 39 million people, and California is the fifth largest economy in the world. The median family income in California is $71,000. The home country and the settlement country have two very different demographics and wage incomes. Just to quickly reiterate the history of that community, over 32 years ago, Honduras transitioned into a democracy. That democracy was never really stabilized or fully functional, and a little over 2 years ago, that democracy ruptured. Since the rupture of that democracy, Honduras quickly began to be filled with violence and widespread corruption, making Honduras one of the most dangerous countries in the world. There are currently plenty of literature and media coverage surrounding the topic of asylum seekers from Honduras moving into California. One of the most important pieces of literature that I found was an article covering the migrant caravan. The migrant caravan was basically thousands of Honduran immigrants making their way through Mexico until they reached the US Mexico border in Tijuana and then trying to cross over into the United States. This caravan made their way throughout Mexico, and it took them approximately 1 month to be able to walk throughout the country of Mexico and finally reach the Tijuana border, which would let them into California. The migrant caravan hit the US-Mexico border in November of 2019, and many of those people crossed into California in the following months. Thousands of people from the migrant caravan are detained in California awaiting for hearings in court. After the Trump administration found out about this in the early months of 2020, they set out to put a solution to this problem. Vice President Mike Pence, along with the Homeland Security Advisor of California, made a deal with the Honduran government that basically gives Homeland Security officials in California the right to take Honduran asylum seekers and send them back to Honduras. The Department of Homeland Security has advised Honduran asylum seekers to stop traveling to California and the United States and look for asylum in countries closer to Honduras, as the road to get to the United States is extremely dangerous. In the article, they also discuss how the Department of Homeland Security and the US are making deals with the Honduran president, aside from the fact that the president of Honduras has been accused by US prosecutors in New York of protecting cocaine traffickers. The Honduran president was also placed in custody in Miami in 2018 and then released after pleading not guilty to his charges. The Trump administration has ignored all these accusations and continues to work with the Honduran president with the hopes of being able to get rid of asylum seekers and kick them out of California. The Department of Homeland Security in the United States are committed to make sure that as many asylum seekers from Honduras as possible can go back home and not let them settle into California. Some key related class materials include the Obermann article, where Obermann writes that immigration is a human right. The main argument is that people have the right to immigrate, and asylum seekers from Honduras have this human right to move and be far away from the country that takes their children and forces them into violent gangs. They have the right to move in search of basic liberties that they do not have in their country. Oberman also mentions that people have the human right to immigrate based on their interests, and that immigration restrictions are violation of human rights. I thought this article was key because the United States and the California Homeland Security are trying to restrict the entry of the asylum seekers and send them back into the country with so much violence. In class, we also mentioned the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, and in particular, Article 13, which mentions everyone has the right to move freely, and then Article 14, which mentions that everyone has the right to seek asylum in other countries. According to the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, these Honduran asylum seekers have the right to do exactly what they're doing, yet the United States and the Department of Homeland Security in California are trying to restrict them and take away more of their rights. Altogether, in my Discovered Scholarship, I found that the U.S. government and the Homeland Security of California do not want to take all asylum seekers of Honduras and let them settle into California. The U.S. wants Honduras citizens to seek asylum elsewhere or to go back home, not thinking about the consequences that many of these asylum seekers will suffer if they are sent back into Honduras. They are making it extremely difficult for asylum seekers from Honduras to try and settle into the country and start a new life in California. In class, we briefly talked about the sense of belonging and the problems that many immigrants face when they move into new countries. The Department of Homeland Security and the United States are making it extremely difficult for asylum seekers to move into California, and the ones that do move in find themselves having a very hard time trying to settle and live normal lives in California. Based on class material and the scholarship that I discovered, no matter how you look at it, asylum seekers from Honduras are having a very hard time trying to settle into California. A future research project that I would propose would be to better research the economy of Honduras and figure out how to stable the economy and if that would better conditions overall. The main purpose of the project would be to research the direct link between poverty and crime. A future research question I would propose would be to research whether Honduran citizens would be okay with giving up sovereignty and allowing direct interventions from big democratic Western countries, regardless of what the big Western countries would want to do if it meant that their country could slowly get better.